There are a wide range of topics that the IGF intends to discuss. A major focus of attention is what's called critical internet resources. And in some respects, I'm a little concerned because if the focus in that discussion is on purely the things that ICANN is responsible for, it's an inappropriate focus of attention. For one thing, ICANN has been doing this now for 8 years. Some of the other components of the internet infrastructure, especially for the domain names and for internet addresses, have been allocated by organizations that even pre-existed before ICANN, the regional internet registries, for example. What I'm concerned about and what I want to focus on in this meeting will be in other infrastructure criticalities like power, available electrical power, communications infrastructure, the availability of trained personnel to run components of the internet, to say nothing of the other kinds of resources that make the internet useful. For example, content that's useful locally. So this whole notion of capacity building is critical. On top of that, security, which is a major focus of this meeting, needs to be attended to, and it is not something which can be delivered by focusing on one layer of the internet architecture. It's not just about cryptography, and it's not just about authentication, although those are two really important components, and they have to show up at different layers in the architecture, because at the basic IP transport layer is one place where authentication and confidentiality are important. But then when you start working your way up, you get into application spaces, the electronic mail, website interactions, and things like that, which also may require authentication, but that authentication has to come at that layer, not down at the lower one. Security is also an issue when it comes to browsers, for example, which may be the main avenue by which viral infections get into people's personal computers, causing them to be turned into zombies, which then become part of the botnet armies, which are used to generate spam or distributed denial of service attacks and the like. The domain name system infrastructure also needs reinforcing, and there's an effort to do digital signatures with that system as well. So there's a really huge range of things that need attention on the basic infrastructure side. Then there are all the other issues that have to do with fraud and other kinds of abuse of the network itself or its applications. And here, governments have a responsibility to try to protect citizens from other citizens who don't mean them well. And once again, we're going to discover that intergovernmental cooperation is needed in order to provide that protection. Technology can't do it alone. So this discussion, I think, is going to go on for a long time, but not just at this meeting, but in the future as well. But it seems to me very critical that governments understand that they do have a role to play well beyond the ICANN structure. We can still use ICANN-like means for those discussions. This multi-stakeholder model is another element of the discussion this week. And it's worked out, I think, pretty well for the ICANN community. And I think that it's working pretty well for IGF, although this is only our second opportunity to find that out. Telecommunications resources are what provide access to the internet, whether it's mobile radio or satellite or dedicated facilities. Diversity shows up most clearly right now in the ability of the network to support multiple language exchange. And I think there's been an odd and undue focus of attention on domain names and the internationalizing of them, undue only in the following sense. The web has been Unicode capable pretty much from the beginning of the web anyway, 1994. And so people seem to argue that they can't express themselves if they don't have internationalized domain names, and I think that's not true. You can produce web pages in virtually every language for which there is a Unicode script. The idea of being able to put domain names into the system in those scripts is important, though, and there's tremendous progress in the last year in achieving that goal. So now we're looking at a two-track possibility of getting domain names into the internet system, a fast track looking at the country codes in particular, and then a more conventional track for the GTLDs. And at the moment, I think there's some tension between those two different TLD operating communities, the country code operators and the generics. And they both would like to land at the same time and both be able to offer internationalized domain names. The other thing I'd like to point out about this diversity is that we don't want to introduce diversity and in a way that destroys the interoperability of the internet. The uniformity of its behavior is important. So if you happen to speak Russian and you're using Cyrillic and you happen to travel somewhere else in the internet, you want your Cyrillic interactions to work still, no matter where you happen to be. And it's easy to invent systems that would support these various scripts in a way that is not consistent, so that once you leave your country of origin, you might not be able to use these particular scripts in the way that you would expect. It's important that we maintain this uniformity and interoperability on a global scale. Otherwise, you've ended up with localization and fragmentation, which is not what the internet is intended to do. Probably ubiquity. Today there are 1.2 billion users of the internet. There are about 3 billion mobiles. By the end of 2010, I would estimate there will be 3 billion users of the internet. And somewhere around the middle of the next decade, I think virtually everyone will be online. So will lots and lots of appliances. And so the net will simply infuse itself or perfuse itself throughout our social and economic infrastructure. Devices, buildings, sensory systems, automobiles, things we carry on our person, appliances at home and at work will all be part of this environment. They'll be manageable through the network. And I think people will discover that they can interact with network-based resources through a variety of different devices, whether it's a mobile on your hip or your purse, or a laptop or a personal computer, or maybe an internet-enabled refrigerator. All of those things will be able to interwork through the network.